morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the organizers to inviting us here, and especially Achim Steiner, our Executive Director, to speak here to you. Unfortunately, Achim Steiner is not possible to come, and therefore I was asked here to do this opening speech, giving, as indicated, the broader picture. And the broader picture is evidently that the Copenhagen, let's say, there was not the deal. So there is not really what was expected, a cap and trade system in place. And so the question is, what is then the role now of carbon footprint? So I would like to show you two policy areas that we have in UNEP, and one is evidently the area of climate change, and the other is resource efficiency or sustainable consumption and production. And I will try to show how actually the topic of carbon footprint brings really these two policy areas together. Here you have Achim Steiner together with Mr. Mombosa from Tanzania, and Ernst Ulrich von Weizsäcker, who is the chair of the International Panel for Sustainable Resource Management. So, and Achim Steiner has put this topic of climate change really top on the agenda in UNEP, and there is and he has restructured the thematic priorities of UNEP together with our governing council. And so these are the 6 areas that we focus on. It's climate change, disasters, conflicts, ecosystem management, environmental governance, harmful substances, and hazardous waste, and the area of resource efficiency, sustainable consumption and production. So I will try to tell you, what is in this area of climate change, the starting point and the focus a bit on the policy discussion that I've at least heard about talking to our coordinator of our climate change sub-program. And it is mainly looking at the energy question, and that energy demand is increasing. And this is especially, of course, of the emerging economies and the related growth. So world energy demand expands by 45% between now and 2030. And it's mainly that coal accounts for more than a third of the overall rise. So actually the renewables are not taking sufficient part of it. And what does it lead to? It's of course not new, is to a tremendous increase of CO2 emissions that are expected to rise further. Under this situation, the leaders of a lot of governments and countries met in Copenhagen and came to this accord. They agreed that the limit for global warming should be no more than 2 degrees. And they agreed also on a national system of measurement, reporting, and verification. What is, of course, here also already the link to the carbon footprint. So we have a question of measurement, and yes, as Rita in the video mentioned, only what you measure you can also manage. And they are ready to provide a 30 billion of fast start finance in this next 3 years or 2 years from now on. And there is a goal to come to 100 billion per year financed by 2020. And there were some emission reduction pledges and actions being announced. But if we now look at these pledges, where do they leave us? If we look at the aggregate annexes pledges for 2020, they range from a reduction of -7 to 16% from 1990 levels. This leads us, but however, we need 25 to 40% to avoid worst impacts of climate change, according to IPCC. So there is a median chance of 2 degrees if the emissions in 2020 are not higher than between 42 and 46 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year. These emissions in 2020 are the emissions, however, based on pledges in the Copenhagen Accord are between 80 to 60 gigatons CO2 per year. So this leads us to the gap between the current proposals and the 450 ppm pathway of 6 to 9 gigatons. So where do we get them from? This is the question. We have, it's clear that this is what we need for the 2-degree level. Otherwise, we are heading towards 3 degrees. So this is the current challenge. And so it is because the carbon trade is not working. And if a carbon trade would exist, probably carbon footprint would be rather a question of distribution because of the limit that is agreed by different governments that are part of it. Of course, this is also the question, are part of it. You know, if certain countries are not part of this carbon trade, also there can be leakages in the system. So, and that is actually then the link where we come to the question of resource efficiency, sustainable consumption, and production also. Because we are looking here at an open system and we look at voluntary activities driven actually by the consumer and industry to increase resource efficiency. And there's, of course, this question that was highlighted here, how can this be supported by policies? The starting point in resource efficiency is actually to say, well, we have CO2 emissions per capita on a production side, but also on a consumption side that are higher than actually the production. So we have the embedded carbon. And what we really have to do is to decouple the CO2 emissions from the GDP. And the real driver for more emissions, CO2 emissions, is the population and the young population, the new consumers in the emerging markets. This is where a growth will happen, and growth is linked to energy and to CO2 emissions. So what we talk about under sustainable consumption and production is to consume and produce more efficiently and differently, and to share the resources between the rich and the poor. That means parts of the world need to become much more efficient, so that others can actually grow and consume better and live better and have a better human well-being. Actually, the factor that is here behind is a factor of 4 to 5. And Roy van Weizsäcker mentioned already early on the factor 4, and now he has made a new book on factor 5. He comes from technology innovation side. If you then look at what in the Stern report is saying, you come also to a factor 4, but from an economic point of view. So from an energy or climate change point of view. So there's quite congruence between these two policy sides, resource efficiency and climate change. And actually now in UNEP, the new heading and the heading for the Rio Plus 20 is about green economy. And green economy is to bring the ecological footprint, or here we're focusing on a carbon footprint, down, while at the same time increasing the Human Development Index. So this is going into the sustainability corner. This is the drive towards the green economy, and this is also the part of starting point for the Vision 2050 study from the World Business Council. So resource efficiency here is about not only the carbon, but overall energy, materials, water, and related emissions over the whole life cycle. So this is very close to the carbon footprint approach, but addressing also other resources and other emissions. And of course, we are in global value chain, as here done with an example. And there are different ways what companies can do to improve the sustainability and to decrease the carbon footprint in this global supply chain. One is innovation, the other is choice, influencing, and the last choice, editing. And I took also this from a World Business Council report here on sustainable consumption that really puts the points what companies can do in this area. So actually now we, like the UN, like other organizations, are starting now to do it at home first. So we have Ban Ki-moon saying the UN system is collectively developing a climate-neutral approach for its promises and operations. And at the same time, UNEP is engaging different organizations into a climate-neutral network. So these are all voluntary activities to drive and reduce the carbon footprint in the organizations to become actually climate neutral. So how to do this, we get to the role of carbon footprinting, because we need to set up sustainable business practices where we need tools, and tools need data, and you need programs, and programs is on the level of improvements, and actually this is only possible if companies on a higher level have adopted certain strategies and put systems and processes in place. So here a key is the carbon footprint, as especially moving from the scope 1 into scope and 2 into scope 3 and into the product life cycle. So now, coming from this broad picture, I would like to also introduce you a bit of the work that I'm personally involved in with the UNEP CTAC Life Cycle Initiative. So I know that Matthias Finkbeiner presented to you already this work. So we are trying actually, and this is a clear request I got from our Executive Director Achim Steiner, to try to help that there's really one global benchmark. So we, from the very technical side, working with CTAC and the LCA experts, had meetings with the World Business Council, WRI, on trying to bring this expertise to that standard, and at the same time, Matthias Finkbeiner from the LCA side is part of the ISO committee working on this topic with others supporting it. The Life Cycle Initiative, it overall is coming from the life cycle assessment field. So for carbon footprint is one case for the global warming potential in this case. And CTAC brings the science, and UNEP brings this access to governments and the dissemination, and it's seen as a one-stop shop for life cycle projects, at least by certain partners. And it provides information on why this is important, but also on life cycle management and how what to do to decrease the footprint and increase the business opportunities. An important part is that this has created really a global network of experts in areas of life cycle approaches and in different countries around the world. And we have Greg Norris here, who has contributed tremendously to this effort to get it really a global network. So if we are now, so these are different publications, and I just also wanted to show the social life cycle assessment part, because focusing on environment is one thing. In a global context of sustainable development, the social element becomes very relevant, and certainly these topics will come up in the discussions at Rio +20. We have then the global guidance on life cycle assessment as the key project currently of the Life Cycle Initiative, because these databases in different parts of the world need a certain consistency so that there's a trust in the data that come from different regions. And yesterday at the workshop on PCR's product category rules, this topic came up between which data to use, which references to make. And here we have different guidance documents that we are bringing together the experts for 5 days in Japan in beginning of 2011 to try to get a common global guidance on these LCA databases. And they, of course, include a lot of carbon emission guidance as well, because they are part of this LCA databases. And the host is actually Atsushi Inaba, who had been here, highlighted also from the video conference slide. So we are not only focusing on the topic of carbon, but we have developed this global life cycle impact assessment framework where you have a number of impacts being considered, and currently work goes on also on topics of how to address toxicity in life cycle perspective and water as well as land use. So this actually has been taken up by the European Commission in the work on the life cycle impact assessment recommendation factors, where the consultation is currently going on, and I think next week there is a meeting in Brussels on this topic. So finally, I would like to end and say, this is the way to address it from the micro level to the products. In our work from the International Panel for Sustainable Resource Management, it's addressed coming from the macro perspective down to the products, using input-output data and linking them to material flows and a life cycle assessment information. And this report recently launched is the Assessing the Environmental Impacts of Consumption and Production. And it clearly shows that the activities using fossil fuels, together with those coming from agriculture and food, are the key to focus on. And that carbon embedded in trade becomes more relevant. And this is certainly the key issue here for the carbon footprint, because it's a question if really with cap and trade, these carbon embedded in trade can be addressed if you have still leakages in the system depending on how much countries are involved in any of these schemes. So this is just the broad overview, and I just would like to come back to the key requirements that we see for a successful carbon footprint tool. That is one global benchmark that is widely accepted, based on sound science, but easy to use. Thank you for your attention.